Two American families got the knock on the door this weekend that every military family dreads. A third family is still waiting for an answer nobody wants to give them. And within hours of that news reaching Washington, tonight, July 20th, American aircraft were already airborne over Iran, flying the 8th consecutive night of strikes in this stretch of the war. This time, under a mission statement CENTCOM had never used before in this entire conflict. Not degrade. Punish. Before getting into what that shift in language actually means operationally, it's worth understanding exactly what happened in Jordan, because this is the moment this war stopped being an abstraction for a lot of people who'd been watching it from a distance. And it's worth getting the details right, rather than rushing past them toward the next strike video. But let's back all the way up, because to understand tonight's strikes, you need to understand what triggered them. On the night of July 17th, Iranian ballistic missiles struck Muwaffaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, a facility hosting American troops and fighter jets that has absorbed repeated Iranian attacks throughout this war. CENTCOM confirmed 2 American service members were killed in action as U.S. and partner forces defended against the Iranian ballistic missile and drone attack, with a third reported missing. 4 additional Americans were medically evacuated to hospitals in Jordan, but have since been discharged, and personnel with minor injuries have returned to duty. CENTCOM said it would withhold the identities of the fallen until 24 hours after their families had been notified. Standard protocol, but a detail that underscores how fresh this loss still is. It's easy to lose sight of amid strike footage and strategic analysis that behind every statistic in this war sits a specific person, a specific family, a specific community that will carry this long after the news cycle moves on. Iran's IRGC claimed responsibility Saturday, saying it had targeted the base at Al-Asraq, Jordan, and claiming to have destroyed several aircraft using both missiles and drones. That destroyed aircraft claim hasn't been independently corroborated, and it fits the pattern that's held throughout this war. Iranian damage claims running consistently ahead of what CENTCOM or independent observers can verify. Trump, asked about the deaths, called it a very sad thing, saying the United States hates to see it happen, and separately described the losses as the ultimate price paid to help prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's statement was shorter and sharper. Godspeed, heroes. Their sacrifice only stiffens our resolve. These 2 deaths bring the confirmed American toll in this war to somewhere between 14 and 16 service members, depending on which report you're reading and when it was filed, plus at least 1 additional death reported separately in Iraq. The bulk of that earlier toll traces back to March 1st, when 6 U.S. Army Reserve soldiers were killed by a direct Iranian strike on a makeshift operations center at Kuwait's Shuaik port, the single deadliest incident for American forces in this war up to that point, and proof that even hardened, fortified American positions in this theater haven't been immune. Whatever the fully reconciled final number turns out to be, the trend line is unambiguous. This is a war regularly and repeatedly killing American service members, not an air campaign being fought at 0 cost to the people carrying it out. 5 months, roughly, from that first mass casualty incident in Kuwait to this latest pair of losses in Jordan. And this war has never gone more than a handful of weeks without American forces coming under direct lethal fire. The State Department responded by issuing a worldwide caution alert, the first of that scope since the opening weeks of this war back in February. That's not a reflexive move. It reflects the State Department's own assessment that the risk environment for Americans abroad, not just in the conflict zone, but globally, has shifted enough to warrant a blanket advisory rather than a narrower regional one. Returning to that alert level suggests officials view the Jordan killings as a genuine inflection point, not simply another exchange of fire in an ongoing pattern. Now the retaliation, because the language CENTCOM used marks a real, deliberate departure from everything said across the 7 nights of strikes that came before it. CENTCOM confirmed a new round of strikes around 6 p.m. Eastern Saturday, stating the strikes are designed to further degrade Iran's ability to threaten commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz and swiftly punish Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps forces who launched attacks against American service members in Jordan. Read that again. Swiftly punish. That's the first time in 8 consecutive nights that CENTCOM has explicitly named the IRGC itself as the direct target of retaliation, rather than describing strikes in the general language of degrading capabilities or protecting shipping. And the speed with which that language shift followed the Jordan deaths within a single day tells you the specific wave was tied directly to those 2 losses, not simply the next scheduled increment of an already running campaign. The distinction between degrading capability and swiftly punishing a specific organization for a specific act isn't a small rhetorical shift. It reframes this round of strikes from a continuation of the broader campaign into something closer to a direct, named response to American deaths, delivered within roughly 24 hours of the attack that caused them. Footage CENTCOM released around 9:30 p.m. Eastern that same night showed strikes focused heavily on deeply buried ballistic missile infrastructure and IRGC headquarters facilities, alongside the coastal surveillance, air defense, and maritime targets that have featured every previous night of this campaign. Some of the explosions in that footage were among the largest recorded in this entire stretch of the war, consistent with bunker-penetrating munitions used against hardened, deeply buried facilities, rather than the more exposed coastal infrastructure hit earlier. Now, the platforms, because there's a genuinely interesting operational picture here, even with key details officially unconfirmed. Multiple signs point toward the possible reintroduction of the B-52 Stratofortress, though CENTCOM hasn't confirmed its use in these specific strikes. Observed activity around Royal Air Force Fairford in England, a base with a long history of hosting B-52 deployments, along with footage posted by senior administration advisors showing a B-52 flying in formation with F-22 fighters, has fueled speculation the aircraft may be flying missions connected to this war. If that holds up, it's a formidable addition. The B-52H, in continuous service since 1961, predates the IRGC by nearly 2 decades, and modern H models have been so extensively upgraded that the airframe is essentially the only original component left. It can carry up to 20 AGM-86B air-launched cruise missiles externally, or the extended range JASSM, a weapon with a stated range exceeding 500 nautical miles and a low radar cross-section that navigates autonomously after release. That lets the aircraft launch from well outside the range of whatever Iranian air defenses remain functional after 8 nights of strikes, releasing cruise missiles that approach along terrain-hugging routes from multiple directions at once, exactly the kind of simultaneous dispersed threat an air defense network built to track individual aircraft was never designed to handle at scale. Alongside a possible B-52 presence, the campaign has continued leaning on the EA-18G Growler, an aircraft built specifically to blind an adversary's air defense network before anything else in a strike package arrives. It carries a jamming system that overwhelms enemy radar with electronic noise, alongside anti-radiation missiles that home in on radar emissions and can permanently take a site off the air, often doing both simultaneously against multiple emitters, degrading Iran's radar picture into static by the time the rest of the package arrives overhead. The F-16 in Block 50 and Block 52 variants has functioned as the precision workhorse throughout, an airframe in frontline service for roughly 3 decades, longer than any of the Iranian operators currently trying to counter it have been alive, capable of putting guided munitions through a specific window in a specific building, in poor weather against a target the pilot may not have seen until walking out to the aircraft. And the carrier strike group operating in the region has kept contributing Tomahawk strikes against Iranian coastal and inland targets, a 4th distinct vector layered on top of electronic warfare, precision strike, and standoff bombing. There's also a logistics signal worth flagging, because it hints at how far this campaign is prepared to expand. The United States has repositioned additional aerial refueling tankers from Ben Gurion Airport to Israeli bases deeper in the region. Refueling capacity is, in a real sense, the invisible ceiling on how far and how sustained any air campaign can be, and it matters specifically for the B-2 Spirit, which can fly a mission directly from the continental United States and strike anywhere on Earth, but only with exactly the kind of extended refueling support repositioned tankers would provide. Trump has separately and repeatedly referenced Pickaxe Mountain, the underground site tied to Iran's nuclear program, as a target primed and ready if deemed necessary. Whether the tanker repositioning is specifically preparatory for a B-2 mission against that target, or simply reflects the logistics needs of a campaign now in its 2nd week of nightly operations, can't be determined with certainty from the outside, but the timing of the 2 developments together is worth watching. Iran's own posture has hardened, not softened, since the Jordan strikes. State media quoted Iran's current supreme leader warning the United States would face what he called unforgettable lessons for repeated violations of the Memorandum of Understanding. Iran has also stated that a significant part of its military capability remains unused, and that its response could go beyond expectations and potentially open new fronts entirely. Language observers have connected to a separate, genuinely striking claim that Tehran is considering a ground campaign aimed at seizing American military bases in Kuwait. That specific claim deserves careful treatment rather than dismissal or alarm. A ground assault on sovereign Gulf territory aimed at seizing facilities hosting American forces would be an escalation of a category this war hasn't seen, and it would require capabilities, air superiority over the objective area chief among them, that Iran's forces don't currently appear to possess after 8 consecutive nights of strikes against exactly the air defense and coastal infrastructure that would need to be intact to support such an operation. Whether that statement reflects genuine operational planning or functions as rhetorical escalation aimed at a domestic audience and at Washington simultaneously is difficult to say with confidence from outside Iran's command structure. What can be said is that Iran has, throughout this war, consistently paired dramatic rhetorical threats with actual military capability that has fallen well short of matching that rhetoric. A pattern visible in earlier claims about unused strategic reserves and new fronts that, in every prior instance, failed to materialize at the scale suggested. Modern Gulf bases are built around layered air defense, hardened perimeters, and rapid response specifically designed to defeat exactly this kind of assault, and any force attempting to seize one would first need local air superiority. Iran's air force hasn't shown the capacity to contest at any point in this war. That doesn't make the threat pure bluster. Miscalculation and desperation have driven decisions throughout history that looked irrational from the outside, but its narrow military feasibility, distinct from its rhetorical function, remains genuinely limited. There's a further complication from the same window. Iran launched additional ballistic missiles toward Jordan, and some debris, along with intercepted missiles, fell into Israeli territory. Israel has remained formally outside this war since it reignited, a notable restraint given its role in the February strikes that opened the conflict. Whether accidental, given the geographic proximity of the two countries, or a deliberate signal from Tehran, Iranian ordnance physically crossing into Israeli territory establishes a precedent that raises the stakes of every subsequent Iranian launch in that direction, and could shift Jerusalem's calculus about how much longer to stay a bystander to a war fought largely, though not entirely, within its own neighborhood. Worth noting too, because the same logic is playing out elsewhere simultaneously. Ukraine launched one of its largest long-range drone attacks of its entire war overnight into July 18th, hitting a Wildberries logistics center in Elektrostal near Moscow, and a second facility in Kotovsk, plus an oil depot in Noginsk, where falling debris forced a maternity hospital evacuation. Regional officials reported between 7 and 9 killed and roughly 25 to 60 wounded, figures still being revised. Moscow's mayor claimed more than 370 drones were launched in total. Zelensky framed the targets as legitimate military logistics tied to sanctioned drone components, the same dual-use targeting logic now defining the American campaign against Iran, treating civilian-facing infrastructure as fair game once its military function is established. Now, the honest assessment of where the Jordan deaths actually leave this war, killing American service members changes a conflict's political and emotional register in a way strike counts and infrastructure targets simply don't. A war fought entirely through strikes on buildings and equipment remains, for a domestic audience watching from thousands of miles away, a story about capability and strategy. A war producing American caskets becomes almost immediately a story about sacrifice and resolve. And that shift compresses the political space for restraint faster than any single tactical development on the battlefield. CENTCOM's explicit naming of the IRGC as the target of swift punishment, language it specifically avoided across the previous 7 nights, reflects exactly that compression. A campaign that had been framed primarily around protecting shipping through the strait now carries an explicit, publicly stated element of retribution, and that reframing arrived within a single news cycle of the deaths themselves. That shift carries real risk alongside its political logic. Punishment, unlike capability degradation, has no clear measurable endpoint. Degrading Iran's ability to threaten shipping can be assessed against observable metrics. Vessels moving, sites still operational, attacks per week. Swiftly punishing an organization is a goal defined by intent and satisfaction, not by any external benchmark. And campaigns built on retributive logic have historically proven harder to bring to a clean, negotiated close, because there's no data point either side can point to and call sufficient. It's also worth sitting with the asymmetry in how this specific escalation unfolded. Iran's strike on Muwaffaq Salti was aimed at a military target actively hosting American forces, a category this war has treated as a legitimate, if lamentable, feature of active combat since February. The American response that followed within hours targeted IRGC headquarters and command infrastructure directly. Institutional leadership, not just the missile and drone units responsible for the Jordan strike itself. Retaliating against an organization's broader command structure rather than the specific unit responsible is itself a form of escalation, and it widens the pool of legitimate targets in ways that make de-escalation harder to negotiate the further it proceeds, because it becomes increasingly unclear which specific grievance any subsequent strike is actually answering. For nearly 5 months, this war has largely avoided drawing in the two actors whose direct entry would most dramatically widen it. Israel, formally outside the fighting since the February strikes that opened this conflict, and a genuinely large-scale Iranian ground or asymmetric campaign against Gulf states hosting American forces. Both restraints appear under real strain right now, simultaneously. Iranian ordnance is crossing into Israeli airspace, even unintentionally, and Iranian officials are, for the first time in this stretch of the war, publicly floating ground operations against sovereign Gulf territory. Neither guarantees either restraint actually breaks in the days ahead. But the deaths in Jordan, and the harder, more explicitly retributive posture Washington adopted in direct response, have measurably narrowed the margin for error on every side of this conflict. at the exact moment that margin was already thinning from months of accumulated strikes, casualties, and unmet ultimatums. Whether this becomes the moment this war's most carefully maintained boundaries finally give way, or settles into another entry in an already long list of near misses, is a question likely to be answered within days, not weeks, given everything else already in motion across the region. What's certain, regardless of how that question resolves, is that 2 American families are grieving tonight, and a third is still waiting for news nobody wants to deliver.